going to get started with it really quickly with a good friend of ours. He is the betting guru and the betting expert. I've listened to him actually just recently talking about the conference championships, and I have been more than impressed. So joining me live via the Global Satellite Network presented by StreamYard, Jeffrey Hook. Jeffrey, I got to be honest with you. I'm a betting man myself. I'm originally born and raised in Vegas. You know how we don't sleep at all. We're 24/7. We love these bets. But I got to tell you, it's funny when listening to you on your podcast with the prediction of the championship games. I went the complete opposite. I thought that the Ravens were finally going to do it, and the bet line was going to go over because I just felt like it's a great offense. The run game I thought was going to be very, very solid. We got the opposite. And then I didn't think it was going to be that much in Detroit and San Francisco because they're both really good teams. I felt like San Francisco, their defense was going to show up. I mean, when going through that and recapping the conference championship, you basically called it from there. What were some things you saw that maybe for our audience to get educated in sports betting that maybe they did not catch?
Well, when you start with that Detroit Lions and San Francisco game, I knew both offenses were going to come out firing in that one, particularly when you look at the Lions, the outside zone run. Everyone thinks about that San Francisco defense and thinks, oh, yeah, they're a great defense, but they've been susceptible to that outside zone run. And with the speed of Jahmyr Gibbs, you saw it early in that game, Detroit was able to take advantage of that. So that's why I like the over there. And the under in the Ravens-Chiefs game, that was just more of, I thought the Ravens were going to control the game on the ground. When you look at how you beat the Chiefs, they allow the second most yards per pass attempt in the league. They allow the second fewest yards per pass attempt in the league. So you can't beat this team through the air. So I was thinking the Ravens, the best rushing team in the league, they're going to come out and they're going to run it down their throat. Just 6 running backs handoffs in that one. So we didn't get to the under in the way that I thought that we would. But when you look at this KC offense, they're no longer that explosive offense that they were of old. They're more ball control and they're relying on that defense. So that's why I like the under there.
Yeah, and it really was interesting. And I think at the end of the day, the narrative of that is that Kansas City's defense, they came out, they balled out, and I don't know what it was, but it just felt like Baltimore ran the ball one time and they did not run again by the time they got to the second half. That's just weird to me. That has been the forte of Baltimore's offense. You run, then it gives a chance for Lamar to do his thing. He throws the ball. He either escapes out of pressure. It was just weird to me. But, I really did think we got a great game out of Detroit and San Francisco. I felt like Detroit all year long. Think about this. If you remember correctly, because I want to know what the line was, because I said early on, Detroit is a great first half offense. What were, in your opinion, with the bet line, how did they basically shape this up for a first half offense like Detroit?
So, that's just credit to Ben Johnson. He did his homework, like I said, with those outside zone runs. And then Jared Goff, if you look at his pass attempts in that first half, he was just on fire. And the second half, you get a little bit of regression there with a couple of bad luck drops and then some questionable decisions by Dan Campbell. But I credit this Detroit offensive line. They've been bullying people all season, and Ben Johnson, just a genius play caller. I actually thought it was a good decision by him, by the way, to return to Detroit, not take one of the last remaining head coaching jobs. I think there'll be a much better offer for him in the future.
Absolutely. And think about it. There was uncertainties between Seattle and Washington. You take the Seattle job, you don't know if Geno Smith's honestly going to rebound, or maybe they might go and draft or trade a quarterback. I feel like if it were me, I'd probably be getting on the phone with Chicago about, Justin Fields, if that were, that was my opinion on it. But the other thing is Washington, you don't know if Sam Howell's going to work. You're probably going to have to draft a quarterback. It looks like Drake May might be the favorite. But yeah, I really am happy that Ben Johnson stayed put in Detroit because it feels like there's unfinished business. He doesn't want to walk away with the narrative of, oh, he's just a really good first half offensive coordinator. No, he wants to be great on both halves. I think because you could clearly see it from just the lines itself. The second half was never strong for Detroit. It felt like they couldn't find the rhythm. They could still move the ball, but they could not translate them into scores. So I felt like that was kind of the problem. But moving forward on it, I'm sure you heard this a lot with, the bet lines. This year kind of felt like it was the year for the fans. It was really weird how the lines really shaped up because at the end of it, towards, the end of the season, it was more of you want to take the favorable quarterback. Am I right?
I mean, yeah, I mean that you can go into any game. I mean, particularly you can look at the Super Bowl and say, how many people are going to want to put money on Brock Purdy against Patrick Mahomes? I mean, so I think that's why you see a lot of public money right now coming in on KC. Everyone's just maybe they bet against Mahomes in the first 2 rounds and they're feeling really dumb about it. Like, oh man, why did I ever bet against Patrick Mahomes? And you're seeing a lot of shift the other way for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it really is interesting of it. And again, Kansas City, fourth Super Bowl right now in 5 years. And, the whole narrative of it, I mean, I could go on for days. I mean, the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing, I mean, I ain't about it. But here's the thing is that, yeah, you look at a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, and I'm sure that this takes into a lot of effect of what the bet lines look like because the fact of, one, you're getting a generational quarterback that despite having not the best receiving core, but he gives Kansas City always some type of edge because I think part of that is you got a great coach in Andy Reid on top of all of that. So, I mean, looking at it, just kind of previewing the Super Bowl a little bit, in Kansas City's case, I mean, how did the bet lines really favor for them? Because I felt like when you get those point edges, mostly it's because you got your star quarterback, you got your star, your superstar head coach, and the rest of it will basically figure itself out. How did this really pan out this year for the Chiefs?
I mean, a part of it is this team just woke up for the playoffs, and you always knew that they were going to be a sleeping giant. A lot of people were down on them in the regular season. I mean, Travis Kelce, he returned to his postseason form. Patrick Mahomes did the same thing, and a lot of people are looking at the 17 points that they put up against the Ravens and thinking, well, the offense didn't really perform that well. And I'm going the other way with it. Patrick Mahomes did what he had to do in the second half of that game. He knew the only way that the Ravens were getting back in that game was if he made a mistake, and he didn't want to make the mistake to let them back in the game. I promise you, if the Ravens had made that a game and the KC needed the drive, needed the score, Patrick Mahomes would have got it done. But he's sitting back thinking, hey, these guys aren't scoring. My defense is getting it done. All I have to do is play mistakes-free football, and we're going to another Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that's the one thing is because, I mean, when you're down in the trenches like that, and again, a lot of people will tell you this, I'm always in favor of it, is that the regular season doesn't really mean squat unless you really do you perform in the playoffs. And I think that Kansas City and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, they've instilled that since Mahomes has been, in this league. And I think the biggest part, it's hard to go against a guy like that. That's why I'm like, when I look at the lines, now I do want to shift to San Francisco on this because let's be honest, Brock Purdy did not look his best in the games he's played Green Bay and the games he's played Detroit. It kind of felt like there was so much anxiety and pressure at the start of the game. And it looked like Jordan Love clearly looked like the better quarterback than Brock Purdy did. But in the end, I mean, adversity kind of speaks for itself. It ain't about just if you're starting it solid. I mean, he started very rough. It's more about how you finish this game. Does this kind of affect the line for San Francisco? Because I know that the hard part is they look at Kansas City as the underdog, and then they look at San Francisco as the favorite. But how could that possibly kind of hinder a little the outcome based upon the lines for San Francisco?
So it's tough for me. I'm really struggling with picking the side on this game. I mean, for the reason you just laid out, Brock Purdy looked terrible in the first half of that game, and then I was talking about the Kansas City offense. I mean, in the second half of the Ravens game, they just kind of did what they had to do. You could argue that both teams easily could have lost their championship games, and it's really tough to really, honestly, it's really, really tough for me to pick a side on this one. I could see San Francisco coming out, they have the superior skill players. I mean, and I could see Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and those guys getting the job done. So right now, I'm on the under 47.5. That's the only lean that I have. I would tell anybody that likes San Francisco, the way you beat this Kansas City defense is on the ground. You look at the games that they've lost this year. They lost to Detroit. Detroit ran the ball 30. If you take away kneel downs, That's one thing you have to do when you look at rushing totals for a game. It's really important to go back and take out kneel downs because they can really skew rushing numbers. Detroit ran the ball 31 times for 121 yards and beat them. Denver ran it 40 times for 153 and beat them. Philadelphia 24 for 117. Green Bay 25 for 129. Buffalo 26 for 120. Las Vegas 29 for 157. The way you beat this team is on the ground. So I would tell anybody that likes San Francisco, if you're going to bet San Francisco win the game, I'd put a little sprinkle on Christian McCaffrey at plus 475 to win the MVP. If San Francisco wins this game, I think that's how they get it done.
It's kind of funny because we're back in the same similar narrative with the Chiefs and Niners since 2019. I think the only difference with the Niners is that this year they've got Christian McCaffrey. They got a solid runner. That year they had Raheem Mostert, who basically, yes, he was on a hot streak for quite a while. But then eventually Kansas City came out in situational defense and they started to kind of, they kind of started to dismantle San Francisco a little bit. But I think part of that is it was a one possession type game. So I think in this one kind of going into it, I agree with you 100%. You've got to be able to attack the run because I think that was also part of the problem with Baltimore. Why they steered away from the run game, I don't know. Kansas City's run defense just was not that impressive. So it's like you have to basically run the ball. But if I had to basically, let's say if I was going up into the air, who exactly would I trust more on the line? Because I'm hearing a lot of just, Debo because he's so exceptional and he's more of that Swiss Army knife for San Francisco. He can run, he can catch, he can do everything. Or would I maybe possibly looking at targets like George Kittle or Brandon Ayuk?
Well, I'm actually really low on Ayuk and Samuel in this game just because these KC corners are so good. I mean, McDuffie and Snead, they don't get talked about as much as a lot of corners in the league. They might be the best duo in the league. I mean, that's why Kansas City is allowing the second fewest yards per pass attempt in the league. When it comes to Brock Purdy in this game, though, I mean, you talked about that 2019 matchup, but what did it come down to? Jimmy Garoppolo missed a throw late in that game that could have won him the game. Brock Purdy doesn't have to be the best quarterback in the world. It's can he find one of his guys in that big moment? Can he make the clutch play like he did against Detroit? He didn't have the best game in the world. He got a couple of lucky breaks, but he also made some great plays with his legs down the stretch, found his guys. And I mean, he doesn't have to be Patrick Mahomes. He has to be slightly better than Jimmy Garoppolo. And I'm still 50-50 on whether or not he can do it because we've seen both sides of Brock Purdy, good and bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting because you're taking one quarterback from Jimmy Garoppolo back then to now having Brock Purdy, where I could honestly say I think Purdy's football IQ is slightly higher than Jimmy Garoppolo's. Now, I do think the ability does go into effect. I also am about that if you've got a player in the trenches, you got to ask yourself when you're in that locker room in halftime, how am I going to get out of here? How am I going to basically take on that adversity and now really run with it to where we're going to win this game? I think that's kind of the big narrative with Brock Purdy. I mean, again, San Francisco, most of this is Kyle Shanahan wants to rewrite that whole narrative of he's been there before where he had a 28-3 lead and he's trying to basically destroy that. And he's also trying to destroy the narrative he had last time with Kansas City. So I want to shift to this because now we're going to have new head coaches. And I can honestly say there's been some pretty good slam dunks. And I also do think there's some question marks in the middle of it. This season, Detroit went to as far as the NFC Championship, which not a whole lot of us would have predicted. I felt like these guys had some dudes. 6 of their draft picks hit. I know this may be way too early into next season, but what do you see? And has there been lines out there yet that could potentially be who might be the next Detroit Lions for next season?
So it all depends. I mean, it depends on the draft. You have to wait for the draft. The Chicago Bears showed all the signs at the end of last season. They showed all the signs. They could be, just like when Cincinnati got Joe Burrow, they could get Caleb Williams in there and they could have the same type of success. But we don't even know if they're going to take Caleb Williams. They could trade that pick. They could keep Justin Fields, and that could be a route to success too. But I really like the way that the Chicago defense was playing at the end of the year, and whether they trade Fields and add pieces that way around Caleb Williams, or they trade that number 1 pick and add pieces around Justin Fields, I think the Chicago Bears could be a sleeper next year.
That is pretty interesting, and I mean, and it's funny because now having Jim Harbaugh back in the league. and now with the LA Chargers. I mean, there's going to be some teams that's going to brew up, but that is very interesting. And Chicago has a lot to think about, and I'll be talking about them a little bit later on here up onto the show. But one thing to ask before letting you go is, so the bet line right now, it's basically standing as San Francisco as the favorite, right?
Yeah, my -2.5 last I checked.
Oh my goodness, -2.5. So going and looking at this, I know you mentioned you were going to take the under on the 47 points. Like now the bet line at 2.5. That's kind of hard to basically go against Patrick Mahomes up at this point. How do you personally see from the lines that are basically given out? How do you basically see this Super Bowl really panning out? And could this basically be something that for our audience, what they need to look out for if they're looking to bet?
So I would say that if you like the Chiefs in this game, I think it's pretty safe to take the under. I don't think that there's any way that the Chiefs win this game in a shootout. If the Chiefs play their brand of football, it's going to be long, sustained drives. It's going to be shutting down that high-powered San Francisco offense. They're going to lean on their defense. And if you like Kansas City, I think you can pretty safely play a correlative parlay and take the under as well. And as I said, if you like San Francisco, I think Christian McCaffrey to win MVP. I mean, if you're going to take San Francisco, I would say put a little sprinkle on the +475, get yourself a double payout there. Because the quarterbacks are always going to be favored to win that award. But this KC pass defense is so good. And if San Francisco is going to win the game, it's going to be on the ground with Christian McCaffrey.
Well, there you go. You want to get smarter with sports betting? Definitely check out Jeffrey Hooks. Where can people find your podcast at Let It Ride Podcasts?
So it's just the Let It Ride podcast. I'm on Apple Podcasts. I'm on Spotify. I'll be posting the Super Bowl show probably on Monday or Tuesday. During the NFL season, I post episodes every Wednesday.
There you go, folks. Jeffrey Hooks of Let It Ride Podcast. So good to have you on and so good to basically educate our audience here when it comes to the bet lines. Good to see you, my man. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.